everyone for joining. Not used to doing workshops remotely. Been doing them live in person, and that's my preferred way. But I'm going to do the best I can, and I hope that you enjoy and have some good takeaways. So, just a little bit about myself. I'm a registered play therapist. I've been in private practice since 1999. I'm contracted with the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, formerly DIFAS. So a lot of the work I've done in my career has been devoted to early children who have experienced early adversity, abuse, neglect, and trauma. I do a lot of family reunification work as well. I was employed as a preschool intervention team specialist with Asbury Park Schools Department of Early Childhood for 19 and a half years, and I just retired this year, so my timing was impeccable. I retired to devote full-time to my practice, and then my practice was shut down for 4 months. So it's been challenging for all of us. I'm sure you all can relate. So, what I've noticed is that children have been struggling as a result of COVID. I'm getting a lot of private referrals, and DCP&P is finally starting to open back up. And what I'm seeing concerns me. Children are struggling with the changes in schedule, a lot of challenging behavior. So I think that this is good timing to discuss limit setting with you guys, because it's a lot of challenging behaviors have come to the fore, particularly in the last 6 or 7 or 8 months. So I'm going to get started. And a little personal share. These are my parents, Barbara and Tom. They were childhood sweethearts. This is their prom picture. They grew up in Newark, up in North Jersey. They were engaged. My dad was the first from his family to come from Italy and receive a college education. They got engaged, or they were married after he finished medical school, and they had 4 kids, moved down to the shore. They had everything that you possibly could want in life. And then in their late 30s, they both became terminally ill. So at a fairly young age, my parents both, this is their wedding picture, and at a fairly young age, they both passed away. And this is me and my brothers. The two, I'm on the right, and my younger brother Dwayne is on the left. We were a year and a half apart, but for some reason, my mom dressed us as twins, so I can't explain why. But I think what she did was ensure that he and I would be partners in crime, and we definitely acted out a lot in response to a lot of the losses and what we had gone through. But I sit here and I share this because I will assert that I was lucky, and so are my siblings. And why would I say that I was lucky, despite losing my parents at a young age? I was 10 when they both got sick, and that is that. By age 5, 90% of the brain structures, all of the structures, the neural connections that are formed, 90% are formed by the age of 5 years old. So it's a crucial to prolific period of neurological development in children. It's when all that groundwork is laid for our ability to cope with life's challenges. And so I've seen throughout my career, as someone who specializes in children between the ages of 3 and 8, really with a focus on early childhood, that early adversity before the age of 5 can present a challenge for children. And those of you who work with children in the classroom or have done so, or have experienced firsthand, that early adversity can be challenging for children because their brains are still developing. So I'd like you to just reflect on your own work and what your own experiences have been, and how many of you have taught a child or had a child in your class that has experienced, that you're aware of, physical or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, domestic violence, had an addicted parent, a parent who's in jail, child who's in foster care, child who experienced parental loss, or a child who either a parent or a caregiver had experienced a serious medical illness or a procedure, serious surgery or an accident, or themselves had an illness as the child. So I'm sure that many of you could probably nod your heads at a good number of these, through, as you know, as you reflect on the children you've worked with in your careers. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is in the context of children who have experienced early adversity, but at the same time, the strategies I'm going to share are best practice, developmentally appropriate, and a good fit for any child, but particularly they're important for children who have experienced early adversity. So our objectives today are we're gonna just overview of how the brain develops and why challenging behaviors are common as a result, the potential influence of early adversity on children's adjustment. We're going to understand the importance of preventive and supportive strategies in the classroom. And as someone who spent 19 years in preschool classrooms, that was such a focus of my work, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward. But preventive strategies, if when done with fidelity and consistency, are going to decrease the likelihood of challenging behaviors occurring in the first place, which should decrease the need to actually do the limit setting strategy itself. And we're going to learn to respond to challenging behavior in a manner that supports children's emotional growth. So understanding challenging behavior. I think it's best to understand, it's important, anyone who works with young children, I think it's helpful to have just a cursory basic understanding of how our brains develop. And this is a simple but I think clear depiction or a representation of how a child's brain develops from the bottom up, from birth through adulthood. If you look at birth through adulthood, the brain develops from the bottom up, inside out. So that lower area is where the fight, flight, or freeze response, which we've all heard of, and it resides in the lowest part of the brain, the part of the brain that develops earliest, and it's associated with heart rate, respiration, digestion, breathing. Those areas are affected when a child's stress response system are activated. If you think about a child whose response is triggered by a trauma or a traumatic memory, what's going to happen? They're going to sweat. Their heart rate's going to increase. That fight or flight response, that part of their brain gets activated. Okay, so that's important to understand that children that have experienced significant adversity, those lower and middle areas as well, are going to potentially be compromised, or the areas that are affected first. The middle area is emotional learning. That's where our trauma memories are stored. It's where our ability to manage impulses, where impulsivity in our brains lie. And again, that develops around the same time as the bottom area. And then the upper area, the cortex, which does not develop until we are not fully developed until we are into our 20s, is where executive functioning lies. And we hear that term a lot. And executive functioning essentially is the ability to problem solve, to anticipate consequences, to think before we react, to anticipate what may happen. Obviously, young kids generally lack that ability because their brains have not developed fully yet. They're not fully formed. So that is why those lower and particularly middle areas of their brain are more dominant. So that is why younger children are still struggling to self-regulate. They're struggling with impulsivity and inattentiveness. So it's important to have that idea, just that basic understanding. And if a child, again, has experienced early adversity, those lower and middle areas are going to even be more activated than some other children who have had optimal experiences between birth and 5 years old. And one other thing that's important to note about the child's developing brain is that research tells us at the age of 4, a child's ability to self-regulate, to impulse control, frustration tolerance, and delayed gratification. Those skills, those emotional skills, are predictors of later academic success. So when I walk into a preschool classroom, or I have a child, a preschool age child, coming into my office for play therapy, that is one of the first things I'm looking for is their ability to tolerate frustration. What happens when they're presented with a challenging task? That's another workshop that I like to give, which is, it also teaches an important emotional skill. But how do they handle frustration is an important question to ask, and something to look for when you're trying to get a baseline of where a child is at in terms of their emotional development. So this is a child. I blacked out his body completely just to protect confidentiality. But this is a preschool child who tore up a classroom, exhibited extremely challenging behaviors, and what could I tell you about this child? He experienced significant adversity, a chaotic home environment, shuttling back and forth between caregivers, very little structure in his life. Um, he was exposed to domestic violence, so he really struggled with those, that lower and middle areas of his brain were highly activated. His stress response system seemed to be on high alert. He was easily antagonized and triggered by other kids' interactions. So I'm sure you've seen these behaviors in your own work, where a child has difficulty sitting in during a large group, has trouble with social skills. And so what we learned about this child as a result of trying to communicate and interact and develop a rapport with relationship with caregivers was that he was doing this to the room at the end of the day, typically because he didn't want to go home, which reminds us that behaviors like this, the aggression, the challenging behaviors that are extreme, can push our own buttons and frustrate us. It's important to understand the context of a child's social environment and what they may be experiencing in order to fully be able to understand, to be empathic, compassionate, and then be able to help them, because it's also going to inform our strategies as well, and how we're going to support that child and ultimately his family. So this graphic is a reminder that our brains are not, they don't operate on a switch. It can't be just turned on and off. And there are a lot of studies that showed that children that are coming from early adversity, chaotic home environments, they come to school and they can't just shut their brains off. So they're presenting with that impulsivity, the difficulty sitting and attending and focusing, their attention, and those are the children that are more likely to exhibit those challenging behaviors. So it's not a switch, can't be shut on or off. And as a result of that, a child whose lower and middle areas of their brain are dysregulated, what is going to happen? Are they going to be able to access the cortex or the higher levels of their brain to help self-regulate? Are they going to be able to manage impulses and frustration and delay gratification? The answer is no. They're not going to be they're less likely to be able to access those parts of their brain if all the lower parts of their brain are on high alert and dysregulated. So what we are going to talk about today, what I'm going to share, are strategies that are going to help that child get the lower and middle areas of the brain, excuse me, regulated, so that they can access the cortex and the upper areas of their brain that are going to help them be more successful in the classroom. So I mentioned preventive and supportive strategies, and these, in my opinion, are just as important as the limit setting strategy itself. These are strategies, again, that as I mentioned earlier, are developmentally appropriate, best practice, and should be part of the fabric of everything that you do in a classroom. So we're in terms of building resilience, and that's what we're doing to try to mitigate the impact of early adverse experiences or early adversity. First and foremost, supportive adult-child relationships. This is the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of what I do as a play therapist. It's the foundation of what a teacher does, no matter what the age of the child, what grade level they are. Um, excuse me. The relationship is the foundation for everything. Now, we want to give them strategies that build a perceived sense of control, and I'm going to talk about that and why that's important as we move forward. And we're going to give them opportunities to strengthen their self-regulatory skills. So, a lot of children that come from chaotic social environments, there's a lack of structure. And I'm sharing this. This is my play therapy room in my office, and it is probably consistent or reflects the consistency, the structure, the consistency, and predictability that a good early childhood classroom or childcare center should have. Is an array of a collection of developmentally appropriate toys and materials to allow a child to express themselves through their play, and everything has its place. That in and of itself, as a play therapist, that in and of itself is healing and corrective and therapeutic. That the physical environment has that sense of predictability that every child needs in order to developmentally thrive. So the classroom, the early childhood classroom, the childcare rooms, the more structured they are, the more corrective and positive environment that's going to create for your students. And the next level of structure is the importance of a daily visual routine. And that can happen on many levels. The one on the upper right, today's schedule, that is something that every parent that I work with or caregiver, child in foster care, I recommend that they implement with their children at home. And the program that I worked in Asbury Park utilized this similar visual schedule. They may be graphics like the one above left, or they may be actual pictures of children, which is also optimal as well. It's effective as well, rather. And then to add structure to, particularly for children who have difficulty staying in one play area, then you can add that additional structure where children sign in and out of play areas, and that hopefully will structure their interactions and allow for them to remain in that play a little bit longer. Otherwise, and I've seen it many times where children just wander the room, and it creates chaos, and it doesn't support the child's ability to develop attention and focus, which is an important aspect of one of the many ways that children learn through play. And another level of structure is the use of timers, whether it's during gross motor or movement music in a classroom on the left, or indoor play, or I like the timer on the right. I use this in my playroom every session. The child presses the green button, the start button, and it's fashioned in a stoplight. So it's green while the child is able to play during the session, and then it gives beeps and gives a 5-minute warning, and then it turns red and beeps again. So that helps structure transitions for children, because transitions, we know, are triggers for challenging behavior. Transitions create a lot of anxiety for a lot of children. So the more structured a transition can be, the more likely you're going to get successful, smooth transition from your children. So there are kids. Screen time, computer time is also a great. This is a great structuring tool for children who many children are really that's their preference, is to sit on the computer or use a tablet or a phone. So a visual timer is ideal to structure the use of those mediums as well. And another form of structure is establishing clear expectations for behavior. It's an important part when we're talking about limit setting with children. So rules, 2 to 3 classroom rules, or 4 at the most. The program that that I was in Asbury, a lot of the Abbott districts have curriculum that is state approved or federally approved, and so we used Second Step, and so those were the rules, the bottom left, that every classroom implemented. And I also use rules in the classroom and in my playroom, and recommend them to parents and caregivers at home as well. So children need to know what is expected of them in order to be able to reinforce the positive behaviors. And then other areas as well, activities like going into the library, having rules is something that I always recommended. So when children know what's expected and there are rules that get reinforced consistently, so they internalize those rules, then it allows you to use what's called descriptive praise. And essentially what descriptive praise is you describe the behavior. I always recommend to pair it with an expression of nurturance, and you can focus on the established rules. So what does descriptive praise look like? Let's say the rule is share toys. So a descriptive praise statement would be something like, Erin, your friend asked for a turn with the doll and you handed it to her. You shared the doll. And you say that with some, I don't know how emphatic I'm being, but you get the idea. That's basically, you're just describing what you're seeing the child do. You asked your friend for a turn, and you shared the doll. Okay, that's descriptive praise. Here's another example: gentle hands. Physical aggression is very common, right, for children in early childhood settings. So a descriptive praise statement might sound like, Thomas, your friend took the toy and you asked for it back. You use gentle hands. So again, very simple. You're giving the child enough information so that they can internalize the behavior and understand it, so that they're more likely to repeat it, as opposed to just saying, good job. Okay, we want to avoid just saying good job or way to go or something vague and non-specific, because it's not giving the child the specific feedback that they need to continue to shape their behavior. And this is an individualized board that I like to create in my practice. I used to do it also in my early childhood position in the schools, preschool. And this is a child who was aggressive. He was aggressive towards pets at home. He was aggressive towards, he had an infant sibling that he was dangerously aggressive with. So he liked Thomas the Train, so I individualized it. So each time he was appropriate, using his hands, maintaining boundaries, using gentle hands towards a sibling or pet. I had his foster mother use descriptive praise. Cameron, you were your brother took your Legos, and you came to me and used your words. You used gentle hands or something like that. So each time that this child was appropriate, the foster mom would use descriptive praise. Affect identification. This is important. And essentially what that is you're naming the child's feelings, expressed verbally and non-verbally through facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language. So why is this important? Because children are still learning to understand their feelings, their emotions. And so they rely on a supportive adult to help them understand them, to be able to name them, and eventually cope with them. So this is a video of what naming feelings would look like. This is a child who was upset that his sister, who was in session with him, didn't want to share a toy. Okay, it seems simple, but that's what you want to do, is describe what you're seeing in terms of the child's body language, their facial expression. Tristan's wearing a frown, his arms are folded, and there are a lot of reasons why that's important. And I'll go to this slide because this is a good representation. So as a child develops the ability to understand that their feelings are held in their body, and that's an important thing for us to develop the understanding of that. Becoming aware of where we experience those strong feelings as children allows us to start to implement and teach them strategies that help them release those feelings and cope with them in pro-social positive ways, like doing yoga. We see a lot of early childhood classrooms using a lot of these types of strategies now, which is great. Yoga, mindfulness, deep breathing. When you help a child develop the understanding that when you feel frustrated or you're really mad and feeling a strong feeling, that you feel this knot in your stomach, and a belly breath is the way to help feel better when you're experiencing that feeling in your tummy. So that is why it's important to help children develop that mind-body connection in relation to their feelings. And here's another video, and just take note of what happens in the interaction, and I'll talk about it. And this is a situation where I wish we were live so that we could have a discussion around it. I hope you all can hear the audio, because I don't see any chats. So I would assume that Jessica would let me know if there was a problem, because it's a little bit staticky. But essentially, what was happening, and this is the same boy that I just shared in the previous video. So this is a kid that was in foster care and DCP and P involved, and had gone through a lot. And so we was really focusing on helping him learn to recognize and understand his feelings and cope with them. So if you noticed in this video, I labeled or named his feeling as frustrated. And what did he say? He said no. So what does that tell us about Tristan and his understanding, or where he's at with his feelings vocabulary? He doesn't know what frustrated is, so he doesn't have the label for that feeling yet. He knows the basics of angry, sad, mad, and so we want to expand his feelings vocabulary, because that's an important step in children's ability to cope with strong feelings, is being able to recognize and name them, and that will lead to a more effective coping strategies for the child. So what needs to happen is just through natural organic interactions, through his play. And I mentioned earlier that this is what I'm looking for when I go into a classroom, or I'm asked to observe a child, is I want to see how do they handle a challenging task, how do they handle frustration, and where are they at in their ability to cope with that strong emotion, and do they have the labels for those feelings? So through these natural, organic, playful interactions, there's a lot that we're doing with children that's intentional. And this is an example in a classroom, and I'm going to play it out, and then just share some thoughts. So what's wonderful about this sequence is that, if you noticed, I'm not identifying how those two boys are feeling. I'm identifying how their behavior is impacting, through pretend play, the babies that they're caring for. And so what does that help us? Again, through a natural, organic, playful interaction that's unscripted, that's not, doesn't involve sitting in front of the classroom or a group with a card and trying to prescriptively teach a skill. This is how, in my opinion, the children truly learn emotional skills, and the ability to regulate their emotions is through these natural, playful interactions. Especially again with a supportive adult who is who's interacting with in specific ways that are going to help children with their emotional growth. So, in through this play, by me identifying how their behavior is impacting those babies, what are they developing? They're developing the sense of empathy, which is such an important emotional skill, to be able to put yourself in another's shoes. It's you know, there's a lot written about empathy and in its relationship to aggression and violence. Children that learn empathy are more likely to be kinder and less aggressive as they continue to grow up. So teaching empathy through play is a wonderful strategy as well. And you could do that if you know, if a child is interacting with a peer and they do something kind, to acknowledge it and use that descriptive praise and look at your. That's something that I do a lot of. I did a lot for the years that I was in my school-based job in a preschool classroom. Was always looking for interactions between children. Look at her face. How does she feel right now? So I want to teach children to read others' facial expressions, others' body language. And again, that is going to help them become, it's going to foster their emotional growth. So this meme is what describing co-regulation. And if anyone is familiar with co-regulation, it's when a child's feelings are expressed and acknowledged by the adult, they're experienced with less intensity by the child. So co-regulation, children, as we learned, or you understand as early childhood experts, is that their brains are underdeveloped. They're still, those lower and middle areas are still developing. So just like an infant who needs a responsive, attuned caregiver each time they cry and they need to be changed, or they're wet, or they're hungry, or they're not feeling well, and each time that attuned, responsive caregiver pick them up and rock them, that's co-regulation. That infant is unable to calm themselves on their own because of their neurological development is at that time. And same applies to a preschool age, early childhood classroom, is that the children need a supportive, responsive adult to help them co-regulate their strong emotions. And this is a great way to teach empathy as well. The boy that, if you could tell, it's a mosaic, but the boy is covering up his classmates, and that's something I would recommend to teachers. That boy is a boy that, as you might imagine, was exhibiting a lot of challenging behaviors, a lot of aggression towards his peers. And so this is a great way for him to do something kind in a very natural, fun way. And so his job, quote unquote job, when it was nap time, was for him to cover up his friends with blankets. And it really had a wonderful effect. And it's something that I always recommended with children that that tended to be aggressive towards their peers. So I mentioned, if you remember the seesaw or the fulcrum, and the first level was supportive adult child supportive relationships, and the next one was to empower children with a sense of control. Now this is a boy that, as you can see, he's going down. So this is a boy that was, you can see he's refusing to go down the stairwell with his classmates, and this is a behavior that is such a trigger for teachers. It frustrates the heck out of them, and I can understand why, because this is all day with this young man. And so he's constantly challenging us and refusing to just do the basic things like going down the stairwell with his, in line with his classmates. But let me give you a little background about this guy. So he was DCP&P involved. He was in foster care. He for reasons that I won't get into, his foster placement was an hour and a half away from school. So he had to get up early, very early, sit on a bus for an hour and a half, and then get into the classroom and expect to learn. And he was exhausted by the time he got to school. So you can imagine, aside from the adversity that he'd already experienced up until that point in his young life, why he would take such extreme measures to exert a sense of control over a world that he had no control over. So that is the underlying motivation, or the reason why he was engaging in this type of behavior. It wasn't to tick off his teacher intentionally. This is a child who's attempting to gain some sense of control over his world. So what do? We give a kid like that, and all children, again, developmentally appropriate sense of control by giving them choices throughout the day in natural ways. So things like, where do you choose to sit on the carpet? Give the child a choice. You can sit on the number 7 or the number 10, and you're infusing some learning into it as well. A lot of some educators don't love these kinds of carpets, but I'm sharing it because I think it demonstrates a good point. Play areas, you can choose, rather than just saying where are you going to go and then let the child run off. Give a child a choice, between two choices. You can choose sand, or you can choose dramatic play. Which do you choose? So empowering a child, where would you like to sit for lunch? You can choose to sit at this table or that table. And that is highly empowering for children. It helps them internalize what it feels like to make choices, which when you get to needing to set a limit, it's going to render you a more effective limit setter as well. And you'll see why as we move forward. Okay, I'm gonna pull my screen down. And I'm gonna see if I can find a different video of the same thing, and see if I can see if this will help. All right, limit setting workshop. I'm gonna pull one of these up. Let's see. This is probably not going to go well. All right, I'm not sure that's going to work. No, this is a different one. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to play this and see if y'all can. Current slide. Okay. Jessica, hopefully you'll let me know if it works.
We're still muffled.
Yeah, it sounds muffled here. Okay. So that was a fail. I'm sorry, everyone. So essentially what I was doing there is describing, in facilitating that child's play, allowing the child to lead the play. I'm describing everything that he was doing as a choice. You decided to check my blood pressure. You're squeezing it. You can see uh, some of the wording underneath. What am I thinking? I'm all thrown off now. Some of the descriptions of what I was doing, just describing play, acknowledging effort. So allowing the child to lead the play, and everything they're doing is a choice or a decision. You decided, you're done. Oh, you decided to come back. You decided to keep checking my blood pressure. So that's how you would frame a child's behavior as a choice or decision in the context of play. Again, another natural, organic way to do that. So here's another one, and it also is subtitled. That's the word, subtitled, that I was thinking, trying to say. But anyways, yeah, here's another video, and this is a good example of how a child internalizes what it feels like to make choices. Okay, so that's a short clip, but it's very meaningful. Particularly the first part, and that's really what I wanted to share was her, that young girl. I think she's 5, internalizing what it feels like to make choices, because it's been reinforced through my interactions with her through play therapy so many times. And again, this is something that a teacher can do in a classroom very easily when engaging a child in play, is just acknowledging when they choose an item to play with. You chose the doll. You decided to feed the baby. Everything is a choice. You chose to share with your friend. You chose the green crayon. So those are all ways that you can frame a child's behavior and play as a choice. And again, the more they hear it, the more they're going to internalize it. So this is an example of how a child needs a sense of control that's experienced adversity. This is a picture that a kindergarten age girl drew, that she was exposed to severe domestic violence, and she's throwing a knife at what represents a dad with a bomb in between her and the dad, holding handcuffs, and she wrote, "You are under arrest." And so for the first number of weeks in play therapy, I got handcuffed to the puppet theater for entire sessions of 45-minute sessions, not able to move or speak. So that was this level of control that this girl needed to feel safe with a strange adult male. And I'm sharing this because that is how important a sense of control is for children, particularly those who are experiencing early adversity, and why it's important to empower them with a sense of control. And she did this once she felt a little bit more comfortable and didn't have to handcuff me for entire sessions. She would divide the room with the most aggressive puppets that I had, and I had to stay on one side of the puppets, and she stayed on the other. So that kept us. She created a clear boundary, and then the boundary dissipated and became more benign, and went from the aggressive puppets to cones. Okay, so that she's learning to trust, and she drew this towards the end of her play therapy. So again, control and the importance of a supportive adult relationship. And that doesn't need to be, you don't need to be a play therapist to have that kind of influence on a child. Teachers have more influence than I do with my one session per week when they have a child, maybe not during COVID, but hopefully soon, every day for hours a day. The impact that a teacher has on their young students is can often be everything, and the most important relationship that they form. And so this is a really a wonderful quote by one of the preeminent neuropsychiatrists, trauma specialist, Dr. Bruce Perry, The Importance of Relationships. You can read it. Relationships are the agent of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. So now we're on to limit setting. Okay, and it's a behavior management strategy. And the reason why I've shared all these preventive strategies up to this point is because now you're going to see why those preventive strategies are part of the foundation of limit setting. And hopefully, if you're doing those things, reduces the need to set limits. But it's a behavior management strategy that involves a choice and a natural consequence. And if we were live, we would talk about this, what behaviors warrant limit setting. Of course, physical aggression is probably the main one, but there are a number of others that you might think of: non-compliance, refusing to do certain things, refusing to sit in circle, etc., or refusal to leave the computer when the timer, goes off, things like that. There are a lot of different behaviors that would warrant limit setting. The benefits, it's developmentally appropriate. And by that, at age 3, generally at age 3, children develop the ability to distinguish between two choices. Okay, and if a child has developed that cognitive ability, then limit setting, I recommend hands down every time, to teachers and of course to parents or caregivers, foster parents, where timeout is a very popular strategy. And it's not, obviously you're not abusing a child when you put them in timeout, but my phrase is timeout is for toddlers. Once a child has the ability to distinguish or understand what it means to make a choice, then you shift to limit setting, because it's more developmentally appropriate. You're going to teach the child, you're going to support their self-regulation, the development of it, and of course executive functioning. So all those parts of the brain, neurologically, they're ready for limit setting, and you want to move on to that. So you're supporting, you're also teaching them cause and effect. Their behavior involves making choices, and there are consequences for those choices, which what anyone who teaches or is a parent or teaches young children, what greater lesson could you impart than prepare them to become responsible adults who understand that everything they do involves making a choice, and that they're responsible for those choices. So this is the foundation for that at that age, where you help them, empower them through that. And it eliminates power struggles as well. So it's empowering. When you set limits and you're giving the child an opportunity to self-correct, you give them a choice. You're giving them a sense of control, that particularly children who are exhibiting the challenging behavior. So you're not just responding, or you're not reacting to the challenging behavior. You're giving them a chance to self-correct and framing their behavior as a choice. So these are the steps for limit setting. And you may not necessarily in any given sequence use all of them. But I think what's important is you may do any combination of these you may utilize when you're setting a limit at a given time. But what's important is that you're giving the child a chance to self-correct, and you're framing the behavior as a choice. Okay, and we've got lots of video. And I apologize that you can't hear them. Maybe some of you can hear elements of it. I'm going to play them through, and then we'll talk about them. Okay, this is a very short clip, but it's a good illustration of how to deliver a limit setting statement. And you're obviously not going to have foam swords in your classroom, but it's the language that I'm using that's important. And you could really consider this, let's say, an act of aggression, because that's, kids hitting other kids is something that happens all the time. So what happened was he hit me with the sword, and I got his attention. I said, you hit me with the sword, so I'm describing the behavior, but I'm not for hitting. So I described the prohibited behavior. If you choose to hit me again, the consequence is I'm going to take away the swords for the rest of our time. Very simple, very concise, very short. You don't use a lot of language. You don't get overexcited. You don't yell. So you're co-regulating. Even if you're feeling angry or the child is angry, you want to help the child de-escalate rather than escalate. So I will say that my entire career, I've never yelled at a child, and I've experienced it all. I've been hit, I've been kicked, I've been punched, I've had my hair pulled, I've been spit on, I've been peed on. I've experienced it all, and I've never yelled at a kid. And I think that's part of experience, and then becoming a professional and understanding where these challenging behaviors are coming from. It helps you be a little bit more understanding and empathic as well. But also, if you think of it as a strategy, that your goal is to de-escalate that child, help them uh, uh, learn how to regulate their emotions. So giving him a chance to self-correct. So now what does he have to do? He has to maintain appropriate boundaries. He has to implement self-control. He has to problem solve and figure out, how do I continue to play with this sword without hitting Mr. Christian? So all those things he has to navigate in his brain in order to continue to use the sword in as you know as he enjoys using it. But if he hit me again, what would I say? We would say, you chose to hit me again with the sword. Again, you chose, even if it was an accident, you chose to hit me with the sword because we want to empower the child with a sense of ownership. You own your behavior. You hit me with the sword, and I'm not for hitting, so I need to take the sword for the rest of our time. And I would just follow through on the consequence and take the sword away. This is an example in the classroom. Sand tray, which is popular and invites a lot of spilling of sand and things like that. So sand tray is or sand play is a common area where limit setting tends to occur. Sand and water. Okay, again, short and very simple. I know you're having fun, so I acknowledge not every challenging behavior that requires limit setting is going to involve physical aggression or anger. These kids are having fun, and they still spilled the sand. So I acknowledge you're having fun, but the sand needs to stay inside the box. If you choose to spill it again, you're going to have to find someplace else. So what is happening here is, even though they're having fun, we still want to enforce the rules, which is the sand stays inside the box. And this is helping them develop self-control and impulse control, those essential parts of those middle areas of their brains that they have to develop. So again, they have to navigate that. How do I continue to have fun sand with my friend and keep the sand inside the box? So they have to actively use that, utilize impulse control, inhibitory control, to keep the sand inside the box. This is a good one, and maybe someone can hear it. I don't know. Okay, so that's Gabriella, and I have a few really great videos of her. She liked to do this. This was a ritual for her where she would have me put my hand on the paper and she would trace around it. And then she obviously willfully and intentionally would write on my hand, knowing that I was going to set the limit on her. So I was describing what she was doing. You're tracing around my hand. You chose the red. So again, just choices, framing her play as a choice. You chose the red. You decided to draw around my fingers. So again, she's internalizing and hearing choices and decisions in context of her just play. Um, and then she chose to write on me, and she did it twice. So I had to enforce the limit. You chose to write on me again, so no more markers for today. What's also important to share about this video is that um, this is a child who was in foster care, who had experienced early adversity, and a lot of behaviors, a lot of challenging behaviors are what? They're attention seeking, or they're for attention. They're to get someone's attention, especially kids that feel like they've been invisible in their world. What do? They act out for attention. So this is a child who came from an unstructured uh, environment where she felt invisible. So her way of reaching out and basically saying, I want you to set a limit, make me feel safe, is that's what that was underlying that behavior, in my opinion. And that's what she was doing, is she wanted the feeling of an adult protecting her and making her feel safe by setting limits. Because without limits, we know what kids do. They come to school and they're the ones that are more reckless. They're more likely to climb to the top of the jungle gym and jump from it. Dangerous kinds of behaviors, which I'm sure we've all seen. I know I've seen it, and those are kids that tend to come from environments where there are a lack of expectations or rules and structure in their lives. So that's what was underlying that behavior. And this is a limit setting in a classroom, and these are two kids that were refusing to share a huge number of these animals. And so hopefully I have subtitles that'll help illustrate the video. I can't hear it. Okay, it's still staticky on my end, so I'm assuming that you guys couldn't hear it. But essentially, you saw that the child was upset, and he came to me with his arms folded, and I said, "Your arms are folded. You look upset." And then he verbalized he won't share. So then I brought him over. He was walking away, and I wanted to engage in problem solving with him and his friends. So I brought him over, and you saw all those animals, and so. I set the limit on, if you choose not to share the animals, then you're all going to have to find a different area to play. And they obviously chose to share, so that was my descriptive praise. You guys chose to share the animals, um, and and great job. You chose to share the animals, so reinforced the social skill of sharing as well, which is obviously a class rule. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm disappointed because the video really accentuates it. Really, it's the foundation. In addition to this part, which we're unable to do because we're remote, but hopefully I'll get an opportunity to do this again with you guys live in the future. It's a lot of the work I'm doing now. I'm really trying to move away from individual day-to-day therapy as much as I love doing it, and trying to do more macro-based work, which is training teachers and parents. And I'm actually in the process of creating an online course for parents as well that's based on play. So these very videos that you couldn't hear but could see are going to be part of the online course that I'm going to be creating in addition to a lot more material. So please reach out to me if you're interested in learning more, and I could put you on my email list. And